They claimed my home was suddenly part of the HOA and hit me with fees, fines, and a fake lien. They thought I'd back down, and they were dead wrong. The day it all started felt ordinary. I came home from work, pulled into my driveway, and grabbed the mail from my box like I always did. A few bills, a real estate flyer, and a thick white envelope with an official HOA emblem stamped in the corner. I nearly threw it straight into the trash. I wasn't part of the HOA. That had been a selling point when I bought this house. No ridiculous rules about what kind of mailbox I could have. No overpriced landscaping requirements. No surprise fees that had no real justification. This was my home, my land, and my rules. So why was the HOA sending me mail? Curious, I tore open the envelope as I stepped inside. My fingers brushed over the thick paper as I unfolded the letter, my eyes scanning the contents. At first, the words didn't quite register. Then, my stomach dropped. As of this date, your property has been formally incorporated into the redacted HOA district. All residents within the revised community perimeter are required to adhere to HOA policies and fee structures immediately. Your first due payment of $750 is expected by the end of the month. I froze, reading it again. Then again. This had to be some kind of mistake. I never agreed to be part of the HOA. I specifically bought my house outside of their boundaries. My deed, my property records, everything confirmed that I was not under their authority. Yet here it was, in black and white, telling me otherwise. A deep sense of unease settled in my chest. I flipped through the rest of the papers in the envelope. There was a copy of the HOA's revised community map, and sure enough, my property had been redrawn into their boundaries. A list of rules and restrictions was included, guidelines about acceptable paint colors, lawn maintenance, fence heights, and even which types of plants were allowed in front yards. But the real kicker? A fine schedule. Not only did they expect me to start paying them $750 immediately, but they had also outlined an entire list of ways they could charge me even more. $50 per day for an unkempt lawn. $250 for an unauthorized structure, my garden shed. $500 for failing to pay dues on time. It was blatant extortion. The more I read, the more rage built inside me. There was no legal way they could just claim my home like this. Could they? Determined to get answers, I grabbed my paperwork from when I bought the house. The official property deed, the legal description of my lot. Nothing had changed. So how did the HOA think they had any authority over me? That night, I decided to ask around. I started with Mrs. Langley, an older woman who had lived here for over 30 years, long before the HOA even existed. If anyone knew how this could have happened, it was her. When she answered the door, her eyes flickered with something I hadn't expected: recognition. Before I could even explain why I was there, she let out a tired sigh. "They got you too, didn't they?" I felt a chill run down my spine. Mrs. Langley invited me inside and sat me down at her kitchen table, where she proceeded to tell me something that made my skin crawl. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. The HOA had been doing this for years. Over time, they had slowly but surely expanded their reach, absorbing properties just outside their original boundary, one by one. They would send letters just like the one I had received, claiming the homeowner had been incorporated into the HOA. Most people? They gave in. Some paid the fees out of fear. Others, tired of fighting, sold their homes and left. And those who refused? The HOA buried them in legal threats, fraudulent fines, and constant harassment until they broke. Mrs. Langley had fought them once, years ago. She had lost. She pulled out a stack of old documents, faded copies of the same letters I had just received, along with pages and pages of disputes, complaints, and warnings. "They know exactly what they're doing," she told me, her voice bitter. "They count on people not having the money or patience to fight back." I sat there, gripping the edges of the paperwork, my pulse pounding. They had been stealing property for years, and no one had been able to stop them. But I wasn't going to be their next victim. I was going to fight back. And unlike the others, I wasn't going to lose. I spent the next several days digging into every legal document I had. Deed records, county maps, my original purchase contract. All of it confirmed what I already knew. My property was never part of the HOA, and yet, according to their letters, that had somehow changed overnight. Determined to get more answers, I went down to the county records office. The woman at the front desk, a middle-aged clerk with tired eyes, gave me a polite but uninterested expression when I asked if the HOA had filed anything that affected my property. "Let me check," she muttered, typing my address into her system. I tapped my fingers against the counter, my frustration growing by the second. Then I saw it, the moment her face changed. Her bored expression vanished. She squinted at the screen, then looked at me. "This can't be right," she muttered. I leaned in. "What?" She turned the monitor slightly. "There's a recently filed amendment to the HOA's jurisdiction. Your lot was added to their district just last month." I felt a surge of rage. This wasn't just a clerical mistake. They had deliberately submitted paperwork to claim my land. "But that's not legal," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I never signed anything." The clerk nodded, clicking through some documents. "You should have," she said, "because—" She turned the screen toward me, pointing at a scanned document with my name on it. "This says you did." My signature was on the form, but I had never signed it. A slow, seething rage boiled in my chest. I had heard of HOAs pulling shady tactics before. Excessive fines, absurd rules, selective enforcement. But outright forging a homeowner's signature to take control of their land? This was fraud. And now I had proof. That evening, I did more digging. I went to 3 more neighbors, ones who had lived in the area before the HOA expanded. Each one had the same story. Years ago, the HOA had started slowly absorbing nearby properties, stretching beyond its original boundaries. Some homeowners had agreed voluntarily, lured in by false promises of increased property value and community benefits. But others? Others were forced in, just like me. Some homeowners had fought back but had been intimidated into silence. The HOA would drown them in legal fees, hit them with outrageous fines, and even threaten foreclosure if they refused to comply. Most people gave in because they didn't have the resources to fight. But I did, and I was about to make their entire scheme crumble. As if on cue, the HOA's harassment escalated. First came more letters. Another demand for the $750 in fees. A warning about my unauthorized garden shed. A notice that I had been reported for violating community lawn standards. Then came the phone calls. At first they were polite but firm, just reminders that my payment was due. But when I didn't respond, they got aggressive. Failure to comply may result in legal action. Non-payment will incur penalties. Your home is now under HOA enforcement. You need to respect the rules like everyone else. They were pushing me, trying to intimidate me. It wasn't going to work. By the end of the week, I had a full folder of evidence, copies of their fraudulent paperwork, records of every letter, every voicemail, every email. This wasn't just a dispute over property rights anymore. This was a deliberate, criminal act, and it was time to take the HOA to war. The HOA had made a mistake. They thought they could bully me into compliance like they had with the others. They assumed I would either pay up or give up, just another homeowner who couldn't afford to fight them. They were wrong. I wasn't just going to push back, I was going to expose everything. The first thing I did was gather evidence. Every fraudulent letter, every threatening email, and every recorded voicemail was organized into a growing folder of HOA corruption. But the most important piece? The forged document. I had never signed it, yet there it was, my name, my signature, approving my property's inclusion into the HOA. The more I examined it, the sloppier it looked. The handwriting wasn't even close to mine. The signature was a poor imitation, likely forged by someone who had never actually seen me sign anything before. This wasn't just HOA overreach. This was criminal fraud. With my documents in order, I hired a real estate attorney. After reviewing the evidence, his response was immediate. "This is illegal. We're taking them to court." As soon as my lawyer sent the HOA a formal notice, their harassment escalated. They began slapping me with fines every week. $250 for unauthorized exterior modifications, a garden shed I had before they annexed me. $500 for failure to maintain community standards, because my grass wasn't uniform with the rest of the HOA's properties. $1,000 for non-payment of dues, even though I wasn't legally part of the HOA. It was pure extortion. They even went as far as filing a lien against my home, claiming I owed them thousands in unpaid fees. That's when I knew I had them. Because filing a fraudulent lien based on a forged document? That was the kind of crime that got people fired, fined, or even jailed. One afternoon, I returned home to find a final warning taped to my door. It read, "Failure to comply with HOA rules and payment requirements will result in further legal action, including foreclosure proceedings." They were threatening to take my home. That was their final play, their nuclear option. They wanted me to feel powerless. Instead, it only fueled my rage. I didn't just have a case against them anymore. I had a case that would bring their entire operation down. I took the letter, placed it in my evidence folder, and called my lawyer. His response? "Let's end this." The next morning, we filed a lawsuit against the HOA. We weren't just asking them to remove their fraudulent claims. We were suing them for damages, fraud, and illegal property seizure. They had pushed too far. Now they were about to lose everything. The moment my lawsuit was officially filed, the HOA's tone changed. Their once aggressive and confident threats suddenly turned into nervous backpedaling. I started receiving polite-sounding letters instead of demands. "We would like to resolve this matter amicably. Perhaps there was a misunderstanding regarding your inclusion in the HOA. Let's discuss possible solutions without involving the court." Too late. They had spent months harassing me, filing fraudulent claims and threatening my home. And now that they were cornered, they wanted to talk? I wasn't interested in amicable solutions. I wanted justice, and I was about to get it. The court battle begins. The case moved fast because the evidence was overwhelming. In the courtroom, my lawyer laid everything out piece by piece, making it impossible to deny what the HOA had done. 1. The forged document, a blatant attempt to claim my property without my consent. 2. The fraudulent fines, an illegal way to extort money from me. 3. The false lien, a direct attempt to steal my home through deception. The judge didn't even try to hide their disgust at the HOA's actions. Then, the HOA's own lawyer tried to argue that this was a clerical mistake and that they had no intention of causing harm. But my lawyer had one last piece of evidence. A forensic document expert's report confirming that my signature had been forged. That was the final nail in the coffin. The judge slammed the gavel down and issued their ruling. The HOA's claim over my property was invalid. All liens and fines against me were to be erased immediately. The HOA was ordered to pay all my legal fees. I was awarded additional damages for their fraudulent actions. But then, it got even worse for them. Since fraud had been committed, the judge referred the case to the county prosecutor's office. An official investigation was launched into the HOA's history of illegally annexing properties. And suddenly, it wasn't just my case anymore. It was everyone they had done this to. Within days, the entire HOA board was thrown into chaos. County officials began digging through their records, uncovering more cases of fraudulent property claims. Some board members resigned immediately, hoping to escape the backlash. Others lawyered up, realizing they were now part of a criminal investigation. Homeowners who had been intimidated into paying thousands in bogus fees came forward to demand their money back. The HOA's corruption was exposed, and it was falling apart. When the final ruling came in, I stood outside the courthouse, breathing in the cold morning air. I was free. No more fines. No more threats. No more HOA. And the best part? They had to pay me thousands in damages. They had tried to steal my property, but in the end, they were the ones who lost everything. I had won. But the HOA, they were just getting started with their downfall. With the lawsuit settled in my favor, I thought the battle was over. I was wrong. For the HOA, this was just the beginning of their downfall. Once the county prosecutor launched an investigation, things spiraled out of control for the board members who had orchestrated this fraudulent expansion. One by one, their dirty secrets came to light. It turned out that my case wasn't an isolated incident. The county's deep dive into the HOA's records uncovered a long list of illegal property takeovers. For years, the board had been silently expanding their reach, forging documents, and claiming houses as part of their community to squeeze more money out of homeowners. I had just been the first to fight back. But now, other homeowners joined the battle. A retired veteran who had been forced to pay thousands in fake HOA dues. A single mother who had nearly lost her home because the HOA illegally placed a lien on her property. An elderly couple who had been threatened with foreclosure for refusing to comply with HOA rules they had never agreed to. With the legal floodgates open, lawsuits poured in, and soon the HOA was drowning in them. The fallout was swift and brutal. Several board members resigned overnight, trying to escape the heat. Others were directly implicated in fraud charges. The HOA's legal defense crumbled under the weight of mounting lawsuits. Eventually, it was too much. The HOA was dissolved. The homeowners who had been illegally absorbed into the HOA were officially released from its control. The county ruled that all fraudulent fees, fines, and liens had to be refunded. Some former board members even faced criminal charges for document forgery and fraud. The same HOA that had tried to steal my property now had nothing left. Standing on my front porch, I looked out at my property, the same home they had tried to take from me. No fines, no threats, no ridiculous rules, just my home, free and clear. I had fought back, and I had won. And the best part? The HOA had been wiped off the map. They thought they could bully me. They thought they could steal my property. But in the end, they lost everything. And I had made sure they paid for it. Justice wasn't just served. It was a full-course meal.